Okay, so we're diving into compliance roles today, specifically how they all work together within an organization. And it's not as simple as just, having like a rule book, is it?
Right. Definitely not.
You've got this whole network of people that are involved, from the CEO all the way down to like the newest hire. And the sources you shared really highlight just how complicated this can get. It's almost like a game of telephone sometimes, where the message of who does what gets kind of distorted along the way.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
And that obviously can have some pretty serious consequences, right?
Oh, absolutely.
So for this deep dive, let's try to untangle that web a little bit and see how we can make it all work smoothly. What do you think?
I think that's a fantastic goal. And you're right, those consequences can be significant. Our sources point out some common issues that come up, like overlapping responsibilities
Mm.
or unclear reporting lines. Imagine being told to follow a certain compliance procedure, but you're not even sure who to ask if something seems off. That's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, that sounds like a nightmare waiting to happen. So how big of a deal is this lack of clarity in the grand scheme of compliance?
Honestly, it's huge. It's like building a house on a foundation of sand. Without those clear roles,
Yeah.
the whole compliance program is at risk. You're more likely to miss those regulatory requirements or fail to detect misconduct early on. It's not just about, ticking boxes. It's about building a culture of compliance where everyone knows their part and feels empowered to actually speak up.
Okay, so it's not just about having rules, it's about having a system in place where everyone understands the rules and
Mhm.
knows how to apply them. And that's where this whole like mapping thing comes in, right?
Exactly.
And I admit, it sounds a bit dry at first glance.
I hear you, but it's actually more interesting than it sounds. Think of it like creating a blueprint for your compliance program.
Hmm.
We need to define who does what, who's responsible for what, and how all the pieces fit together.
All right, I'm starting to see the value here. So let's break down this blueprint. Who are the key players that we need to understand?
Let's start with the heart of it all, the compliance department itself. And at the top, you've got the chief compliance officer, the CCO.
Right, the CCO. So is that basically like the head rule enforcer?
They're definitely responsible for making sure the organization follows the rules, but it's much more than that. Think of the CCO as the architect of the entire compliance program. They have a strategic role, identifying potential risks, setting the overall direction, and making sure the program is aligned with the organization's goals.
So not just a rule enforcer, but like a real strategist.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense. But the CCO can't do it all alone, right? Who else is on the compliance team?
You've got your compliance managers and analysts. They're the folks in the trenches, so to speak. They're the ones operationalizing the policies that the CCO puts in place, conducting training, monitoring activities, and reporting on the compliance performance of different parts of the organization.
So if the CCO is the architect, these are the builders, making sure the plans are actually put into action.
Exactly. They're like detectives, making sure everything is running smoothly and catching any potential issues before they become big problems.
Detect, I like that. But compliance isn't just about what happens within the compliance department, right? It needs to be woven into the fabric of the whole organization.
You're absolutely right. And that's where business unit leaders come in. They're responsible for making sure compliance is baked into the day-to-day operations of their teams. It's not just a separate to-do list, it's part of how they do business.
So they're kind of like the foreman, making sure the workers on the ground are following the blueprints.
That's a great analogy. They're the ones translating the compliance program into concrete actions within their specific areas.
And then you've got the department managers, right? Making sure their teams are actually adhering to those policies and regulations.
Yes, they play a critical role in translating those high-level requirements into actionable steps for their teams. It's about cascading that message down effectively.
This is where we see how interconnected everything is, isn't it? You need that clear line of communication from the top all the way down to the individual employees.
Absolutely, it's like a chain reaction. Each level depends on the one above it to provide clear direction and support. But there are also other players involved, not just the direct line of command.
Right. What about the support functions, like legal HR and IT? They're not directly in the compliance department, but they must play a pretty big role, right?
They're absolutely crucial. I think of them like specialized units, each with their own superpowers. Legal provides guidance on regulations and enforcement actions. HR handles things like whistleblower mechanisms and employee training. And IT ensures data privacy and security.
Wow, talk about teamwork. It sounds like a well-oiled machine when everyone knows their role and how they contribute to the bigger picture. But what about keeping everyone accountable? Who makes sure all these different players are actually doing what they're supposed to be doing?
That's where internal audit comes in. Think of them as the independent watchdog, making sure the compliance program is actually effective. They're not part of the compliance department itself, which allows them to provide an objective assessment.
Okay, so they're kind of like the quality control inspectors, making sure everything is up to code.
Exactly. They'll review policies and procedures, test controls,
Right.
and conduct audits to make sure the compliance program is being implemented as intended. They also monitor for any red flags or potential issues
Hmm.
and report their findings to senior management and the board.
So they're keeping everyone honest, which is super important. And finally, we have the folks at the very top, the board and senior leadership. What's their role in all of this? I mean, they're probably busy with a million other things, right?
You'd think so. But their role in compliance is absolutely crucial. They're the ones ultimately responsible for the organization's compliance posture. They set the tone from the top, making it clear that compliance is a priority, not just something to be dealt with when there's a problem.
So they're not just signing off on policies. They're actively championing a culture of compliance throughout the organization.
Exactly. They're responsible for overseeing the entire compliance program, making sure it's adequately resourced, and holding everyone accountable for their part. Think of them like the captain of a ship. They set the course, make sure the crew is trained and equipped, and ultimately bear the responsibility for navigating safely.
So we've got our CCO architect, our compliance manager detectives, our business unit leaders as foremen, our specialized support units, our internal audit quality control inspectors, and our board and senior leadership steering the ship. That's quite the crew.
It really is. And the key takeaway here is that each of these roles is interconnected. Effective compliance relies on collaboration and communication between all of these players.
Okay, that makes sense in theory. But what happens in the real world when these roles aren't clearly defined? You mentioned earlier that this lack of clarity can lead to serious problems. Can you give me an example of how this might play out?
Absolutely. One of the sources you shared actually details a case study of a financial services company that ran into some serious trouble because of unclear roles in their anti-money laundering program.
Okay, this sounds interesting. Tell me more.
Well, there was confusion between the compliance team and the business units about who was responsible for conducting customer due diligence. Compliance thought the business units were handling it, and the business units thought compliance was taking care of it.
Oh, wow.
As a result, some high-risk customers weren't properly vetted, and the company ended up paying a hefty fine to regulators.
Ouch, that's a costly mistake. It sounds like a classic case of too many cooks in the kitchen. Or maybe in this case, not enough cooks and no one's sure who's supposed to be cooking.
Exactly. And it's a common problem. Organizations often assume everyone knows who's responsible for what. But in reality, there's a lot of ambiguity, and that ambiguity can create significant risk.
So how did this financial services company fix the problem? I mean, once the damage is done, how do you go back and untangle that mess?
They realized they needed to clearly define roles and responsibilities. They took a step back and implemented a comprehensive role mapping exercise using a tool called a RCI matrix.
Okay, I've heard of a RACI matrix before, but honestly, it sounds a bit intimidating. Can you break it down for me?
It's simpler than it sounds, I promise.
Yeah.
RCI stands for responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. It's a way to visually represent who's involved in a process and what their specific role is.
So you're basically mapping out each step of a process and assigning clear roles to each task.
Exactly. For example, in the case of customer due diligence, the business unit might be responsible for collecting customer information, but the compliance team is accountable for verifying that information and making sure it meets regulatory requirements.
I'm starting to see how this could be helpful. So you're not just saying, okay, compliance is responsible for customer due diligence. You're actually breaking it down into smaller steps and assigning clear roles for each of those steps.
Exactly. And the beauty of the RCI matrix is that it not only clarifies who's doing what, but also who needs to be consulted and who needs to be kept informed. So in our example, legal might be consulted if there are complex legal questions about a particular customer. And senior management is informed about any high-risk customers that are flagged.
Okay, I see how this could help prevent those situations where things fall through the cracks, because everyone assumes someone else is handling it. So is the RCI matrix the only tool organizations use for role mapping?
It's a popular one, but there are others as well. Some organizations use simple organization charts. to visually represent reporting lines and accountability.
Yeah.
Others use compliance responsibility matrices, which are basically spreadsheets that list out specific compliance responsibilities
Yeah.
and who they're assigned to.
So there's a whole toolkit out there to help organizations map this stuff out effectively. But this wouldn't just be a one-time thing, right? I mean, businesses are constantly evolving, new regulations pop up, teams change. How do you keep up with all that?
You're absolutely right. Role mapping isn't a set it and forget it exercise. It needs to be reviewed and updated regularly to reflect any changes within the organization or in the regulatory landscape. New roles might be created, existing roles might evolve, and new regulations might require adjustments to the compliance program.
So it's not just about creating documents and charts, it's about building a system that's flexible and adaptable. But how do you prevent this from becoming just another bureaucratic exercise? You know, a bunch of paperwork that no one really pays attention to.
That's a great question. And that's where communication and culture come in. You need to create a culture where compliance is seen as everyone's responsibility, not just the compliance department's job. And that starts with clear communication from the top down.
So regular check-ins, making sure everyone is on the same page, and being open to feedback and adjustments as needed.
Exactly. It's an ongoing process. But the payoff in terms of risk management and building a strong compliance culture is well worth the effort.
All right, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We talked about why mapping compliance roles matters, who the key players are, and some practical tools to get started. But what about our listener who might be thinking, okay, this all sounds great, but where do I even begin?
That's a great question. First and foremost, I'd say take stock of your current situation. Do a little audit of your own organization. Are compliance roles clearly defined? Are there any areas of overlap or confusion?
So start by taking a look at your own compliance blueprint, or maybe trying to sketch one out if it doesn't already exist.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to ask questions. Talk to people in different departments. Find out who's doing what, and whether there are any pain points or areas where things aren't clear. Once you have a good understanding of where you stand, you can start to use tools like the RACI matrix or a compliance responsibility matrix to clarify those roles and responsibilities.
And don't forget the power of communication. Make sure you're having regular check-ins with different departments, fostering collaboration between compliance and other key functions. Compliance can't be siloed. It needs to be integrated into the fabric of the organization.
Absolutely. It's an ongoing process. But the payoff in terms of risk management and building a strong compliance culture is well worth the effort. When everyone understands their role in compliance, it creates a sense of shared responsibility and accountability.
I love that. Shared responsibility and accountability. That's a great note to transition to our final thoughts for the listener. We've given you a solid foundation for understanding how compliance roles fit together within an organization. But the real work starts now. It's time to apply this knowledge to your own organization. Think about it. Are roles clearly defined where you work? Where are the potential trouble spots? This has been a really insightful deep dive.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm really starting to see how something as seemingly simple as clearly defining roles can have such a massive impact on an organization's compliance
Right.
posture.
It's true when you think about it. Those clearly defined roles are like the foundation of a well-functioning compliance program.
Yeah.
It's like a jigsaw puzzle. Each piece needs to fit perfectly for the picture to be complete.
I love that analogy. And in the compliance puzzle, each role represents a critical piece.
Absolutely.
You've got the CCO setting the overall strategy, the compliance managers and analysts putting those strategies into action, the business unit leaders integrating compliance into their day-to-day operations, the support functions providing their specialized expertise, internal audit providing that independent oversight, and the board and senior leadership setting the tone from the top. It's amazing how it all comes together.
It is, and when all those pieces are in place
Yeah.
and working together harmoniously, that's when you create a truly compliant and ethical organization. An organization where everyone understands their role and feels empowered to speak up if they see something that's not right.
Absolutely. So to our listener out there, we encourage you to take a closer look at your own organization's compliance puzzle. Are all the pieces there? Are they fitting together properly?
Good question.
If not, don't be afraid to start making some adjustments. Talk to your colleagues. Review your policies and procedures. And consider implementing some of the tools we've discussed today, like the RCI matrix or a compliance responsibility matrix.
Yeah, those can be really helpful.
Even small changes can make a big difference. This deep dive has given you the knowledge to start making a difference. So go out there and build that strong, resilient compliance puzzle in your own organization.
Absolutely. And until next time, keep diving deep